regulations shift, the stakes are high. The Mag breaks it down, no need to sigh. From EU rules to global news, Reg with Meg, your trusted views.
Welcome to Reg with Meg, your go-to source for regulatory news and insights. I'm your host, Tiffany Brown, and today we're joined by Darryl Wisdahl, MedEnvoy's Director of Consulting Services at our U.S. office, to talk about the latest QMSR transition from the FDA. Darryl, welcome again to the show.
Thanks, Tiffany, for having me back. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about this stuff.
Of course. So I'm going to just go ahead and dive right in with the first question, which is, what is the FDA's new Quality Management System Regulation, QMSR? And how does it differ from the Legacy Quality System Regulation, or QSR?
Great question. The FDA has completely modernized its device quality regulations for the first time in decades. The new Quality Management System Regulation, as we're calling it, the QMSR, has replaced the old QSR, and it lines it with the requirements from ISO 13485-2016, which is that global standard for medical device quality systems. It's really the opportunity for FDA to move from a very US-centric framework to a global harmonized one. And this is something that, companies have been looking for years. I mean, manufacturers are going to notice changes in the terminology, in documentation expectations, and importantly, in the level of transparency required during their inspections. I think there was something, though, that I think it's really important to say here. And I kind of have a laugh about this. A number of years ago, it was probably in the mid-90s, maybe late 90s, I was at a conference, a RAPS conference in Washington, D.C., and I met with an FDA official, and we were talking about the quality system regulations. And I said, hey, I was a junior, naive regulatory and quality person at the time, and I kind of said to this senior person, hey, has the FDA ever thought about, kind of bringing their quality system regulations in alignment with this ISO 13485, and at that time it was the 2003 version, or actually probably the 1996 version of the standard. And I remember the official saying to me, it sounds like a great idea, Darryl, but I don't know if it's ever going to happen. It's just not something the FDA likes to think about. Like, we have our regulations, we're going to do it our way. And here we are, roughly 30 years later, and now we've finally got this transition from what was their first release of the quality system regulations to now transitioning and using ISO 13485-2016, bringing the FDA into, quote unquote, the modern world that every other country in the world is following for a standard.
All it took was 30 years.
All it took was 30 years, exactly.
Wow. That's interesting that you were even thinking about that back then.
It was funny because I was going through a pre-market approval application with the FDA for PMA, and my company was implementing ISO 13485 at the same time. And it was like, why are we doing two different things at the same time? Why are we doing one quality system to comply with this ISO 13485 system? Why are we doing that while we're also having to do this FDA thing? Otherwise, we wouldn't get our pre-market approval for our device.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. That'll lead me into my next question for you, which is, when did the QMSR become effective? And what are the compliance implications for medical device manufacturers who have not completed the transition?
Wow. Great question. Let me deal with the first part. I mean, the QMSR became effective February 2nd, 2026.
Mm-hmm.
There's no looking back. We're done. This is now the rule of the land. This is the way we're moving forward within the FDA. So if your product is going into the United States, or you're in the United States already, you need to follow the QMSR.
This is
the
it.
FDA exists exactly it. And the FDA has retired that old QSR. They've retired their old quality system inspection technique for inspection. So this is called the QSIT inspection technique. They got rid of that because it was all based on the old way of doing things under the QSR. So the agency, the FDA, is not expecting any old stuff now. When they come in, they look at your quality management system, they expect compliance to the new QMSR now, not a week from now, not a month from now, not a year from now. And if you haven't transitioned right now and you have an inspection coming up, That's a recipe for findings. That's a recipe for disaster in that
Hmm.
in that inspection. The FDA is going to immediately say you did not follow what we said to you on February 2nd, 2024, when we told you you've got 2 years to
Hmm.
update your quality management system to meet the requirements of ISO 1345, and you haven't done that. So you haven't been complying with the FDA regulations.
Hmm.
So really the bottom line is what happens if you're not ready? You are going to have a problem with the findings, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that means if you're not ready and such as we go on. But it's really important to know you're behind.
Yeah,
That you're
quite
behind where
behind.
you need to be with your quality management system.
Yeah, because like you said, they had 2 years. This was known that this. Well, when you say 2 years, was it known that the transition was happening for 2 years?
Absolutely. In
Okay.
February of 2024, they published in their regulations a change to the quality system regulation. And at that time, they specifically announced that manufacturers are going to be given a 2-year timeline to transition from the quality system regulations to the quality management system regulations. At that time, in February of 2024, they actually published what the new regulations were going to be in
Mhm.
2026. So they told us, they told all of
Wow.
us exactly what we needed to do. I mean, I think it's like 65 pages of questions and answers of what does this mean? What does that mean? Because they've been working on this for a number of years. And it finally came to fruition in 2024 that they were going to make this change. And so now here we are. We're working with manufacturers that have said, well, this kind of snuck up on me. This is not sneak up on you. This has been something that's been announced 2 years ago. And I liken this to what happened with the medical device regulations for Europe.
Mhm.
I love to bring that up again. I always talk about medical device regulations where they announced it in 2017 there was going to be this new US medical device, sorry, no US, EU medical device regulation.
Mhm.
And companies thought, oh, I got lots of time. I got lots of time. 5 years is a long time. 4 years is a long time. Then we got closer and closer to the deadline, and manufacturers are going, whoa, hang on a minute. What am I supposed to be doing here? I haven't done anything.
Mhm.
I'm really hoping that this isn't the case with companies when it relates to the quality system. FDA has so much power when it comes to regulating companies in the United States and international companies. And during an inspection, if you're not in alignment with the new quality management system regulations, you're going to have troubles.
I guess sometimes stuff that seems so far away, it can creep up on people pretty quickly, and they're like, "Oh, oh no, it's here. I scramble, got to do something about it." Leading into that, one major change in the QMSR is the incorporation of ISO 13485/2016 by reference. Can you explain what that means and why it's particularly significant for U.S. medical device companies?
Well, what's really specific about it is up until now, 1345, it's just really been a guidance or a guideline for manufacturers um, and for companies who are selling in the United States. Now, by using this term incorporated by reference, it's taking ISO 1345 and legally embedding it into the US regulation. So it's now legally embedded into Title 21, Code of Federal Regulations, Part 820. And it says specifically ISO 13485 is incorporated, which means all the sections of ISO 1345 apply effective February 2nd, 2026. It is no longer a guidance or something. It basically says you must follow ISO 1345 as part of your quality management system compliance. And this is okay. I mean, for those companies who are already operating globally, they're already ready for this. But if you're a US only company, this is a major shift. This is a major shift because in the past, well, FDA may come to my facility, so I kind of have compliance with the sections of Part 820 of the Code of Federal Regulations. You can't do that anymore. The incorporation by reference means you have to, by law, follow the requirements of ISO 1345.
Wow. So, how would you say this applies to not just only US medical device companies, but all manufacturers?
Well, I mean, if there's two parts to that. So, if you're a manufacturer that is already selling devices into the United States, but are also selling globally, it's quite likely you have a quality system in place already that complies with ISO 1345. So it's not a big adjustment for you to deal with this, because the additions that are being put into the quality management system regulation, or the QMSR, there's a few little things that are US specific that are not listed in ISO 1345. Things around service records, things about record keeping in general are very specific to the US, and they kept those in their QMSR. Absolutely kept those in. UDI is another prime example of very specific language around unique device identification, or identifiers, that's specific to the FDA, that's been included in the QMSR. But there's one thing that you said there that's really important, is that not all manufacturers will be impacted by this. There are some manufacturers who have medical devices that the FDA has determined, for a variety of reasons, that these products are considered GMP, or good manufacturing practice exempt devices. So these are devices that, and I'll just use an example, and I may be wrong, so if somebody hears this and I'm wrong, please don't send any hate mail to me. But if you say, for example, the FDA might say that all tongue depressors are GMP exempt, meaning you don't have to follow all of the regulations for good manufacturing practices as the FDA had it at the time for your device. There's enough evidence that that type of device is safe and effective that the FDA doesn't have significant concern about that. What does that mean for those companies now that, because GMP in the United States was replaced by the good manufacturing practices, was replaced by the quality system regulations. Now the quality system regulations have been replaced by quality management system regulations. What does that mean for that company who has a product who FDA has stated clearly, this product is exempt from good manufacturing practices? Does that mean I'm exempt from ISO 13485? And the answer to that is yes, somewhat. Yes, meaning you are exempt from the general sections of ISO 1345 if you are a GMP exempt product. But you still have those requirements that existed previously before, which means complaint handling. You have a responsibility to have a procedure in place for complaint handling. For field safety corrective action, or device recall, as we call it in the United States, or corrections and removals, as we call it in the United States. For medical device reporting or vigilance events, you have to have a procedure for that. And obviously, we're dealing with labeling and unique device identifiers, so you have to have a procedure for that. And you have to have a procedure in place for handling records and management of those records. But those companies who are exempt from GMP, they don't fall into the category of all manufacturers have to follow ISO 1345. I hope that helps understand that.
No, that's good information, particularly for not even just US, but all manufacturers going into this. Segueing into the next question, MedEnvoy's article emphasizes performing a gap assessment. What should manufacturers be looking for in such an assessment? And where are common pitfalls they might face?
Oh, great question. I think one of the first things you should do is check your terminology and documentation. Many of the FDA-specific terms have now been replaced by ISO equivalents. I'm going to come back to that point in a minute. Also, look hard at your risk management process. FDA inspectors, if they come on site, will now use your risk files as their roadmap for doing their inspections. They're definitely going to spend a lot of time looking at your risk files, and that's going to be critical. Now, if you're already ISO 1345 certified, you're kind of used to risk management being important. But if you've not followed ISO 1345 in the past, this is going to be a change for you. FDA is going to really be focusing on risk management. Third, make sure your internal audits, your supplier audits, and your management review files are all inspection ready. Up until February of 2026, FDA was not allowed to look at those records by the way the regulation was written in the Quality System Regulation 8, Part 820. But when they introduced incorporation by reference of ISO 1345, those exempted or accepted documents that are not allowed to be reviewed are no longer off limits. Now the FDA can actually ask you during an inspection, please show me your supplier audits, please show me your management review, please show me your internal audit. So you need to make sure that what you're writing in those files is ready to be inspected by an FDA inspector. And finally, don't forget about your FDA-specific requirements. I talked about unique device identifier and medical device reporting. those things will continue to exist, as I mentioned, even with ISO 1345 coming in place. So with the quality management system regulation, one thing that's important, it updates Part 820 of the regulation. It does not update or change the other regulations that you have to comply with, whether that's Part 830 for unique device identifiers, Part 803 for medical device regulations, or Part 807 for 510Ks and establishment registrations. Now, I mentioned I wanted to come back to that first point. Check your terminology and documentation. That just doesn't mean a quick glance. Don't just quickly look at your quality procedures. You need to look at each of your procedures and check for those FDA-specific terms. Device master record, device history record, design history file. Also check if you've included references to specific sections of the Code of Federal Regulations. For example, many people have written in their complaints procedure, when we're following quality management requirements for complaints handling for the United States, we'll reference CFR Part 82198, or more formally known as Title 21, Code of Federal Regulations Part 82198, is a section for complaint handling in their old regulation. Now, if you've got that section written in your procedure, that doesn't apply anymore. Another search term that you should be looking at is look to see if you've referenced the Quality System Regulation, or QSR, in your procedures. If you've referenced those things don't exist anymore. So your procedures need to be updated to remove QSR or change it for QSR to QMSR. So there's a lot of things you need to be looking for when you're doing that search that's more than just a quick little glance at your documentation. I can tell you that doing a review of a quality management system for a couple clients, we're talking 10, 12 hours of review, every single procedure, opening, searching those procedures for specific terms, and then coming up with suggested language on how to replace the FDA-specific term to be something more in alignment with ISO 1345 and the QMSR.
Could you tell me what are some specific examples of procedural or documentation updates companies will need to make, like SOP references or complaint handling?
That's a great one. As I kind of mentioned about your SOPs where they reference the design history file or the DHF, device master record, DMR, or the DHR, these are all FDA-specific terms. I can tell you that companies I've worked with in Europe and companies I've worked with in Asia and in North America and in Latin America have all been using these terms for years. The DHF, the DMR, the DHR, we've all used those. Those were all ingrained in the old FDA QSRs. Now, when we switch to the QMSR, we'll need to switch to ISO terms, like the design and development file, which is a replacement for the design history file, or the medical device file, which is a replacement for the device master record. And I say replacement, it's a very close alignment with those former FDA terms. Again, you need to align your procedure for internal audit and management review to make sure that you indicate in there that the FDA can now see those records. A lot of us have written in our procedures in the past, for example, in our management review, in the management review procedure, you'll say, these records are not available for review by FDA. However, the review can be done by an ISO qualified auditor or ISO certified auditor. You can't say that anymore. We used to also have in our management review procedure often a statement that says, please create a summary document that says which sections of the regulation were reviewed and when it was reviewed and who was in attendance. And that was your only record of the management review. That doesn't exist anymore. That has to be pulled out, and you now have to indicate, here's our management review. So here's our agenda, here's our minutes, here's our summary that comes out of our action items, etc. I already talked about complaints handling and how now complaints handling have to reference both ISO 1345 and FDA's post-market rules like the MDR. So you now have to look at all those ISO 1345 specific terminology that exists for complaints handling in their section 8.2.2 of the standard, and also pull in all those remaining sections that exist with the QMSR, as well as those other sections of the CFRs like Part 803 for medical device reporting. Also look at your risk management files. Make sure you are ready, that there's risk management is being done as a life cycle. It's not just a one and done shot like it used to. So many people have thought about risk management as I do my risk management one time and then I'm done. ISO 1345 incorporates ISO 14971 risk management standard and says risk management is a life cycle process. So you have to be taking that into consideration when you're doing the transition to this change to from the QSR to the QMSR.
Wow, so many things they have to make sure it's correct going into this transition. Um,
And that's
going
why
into
it's so important. It's so important
Mhm,
that we, when we think about this, the FDA gave us 2 years to do this. And
yeah,
now there are companies that are kind of at the last minute thinking about, "Oh my goodness, how am I supposed to handle this? This is something that's, again, this has snuck up on me." Well, again, we'll go past that already, but we have to deal with today. There are a lot of things you have to be thinking about when you're looking at your quality management system, and it has a much deeper role than just your procedures.
wow. So going into my next question, how has FDA inspection strategy changed with the QMSR, especially with a shift from QSIT, did I say that right? QSIT?
You said, yeah, absolutely.
QSIT to the new Inspection Program Compliance Program Manual 73A2850. And what should manufacturers anticipate in an inspection?
Wow. If you've
Loaded
never been in
question.
it's a
Loaded
loaded que
question.
Yeah, exactly. If you've never been inspected by an ISO 1345 auditor in the past, this will be new for you. If you've been inspected by ISO 1345 auditors, this is not gonna be a big change for you. But what the big change really is that QSIT model was using these 6 or 7 subsystems that they would look at, including management and design and complaints, et cetera, that would all be part of manufacturing, would be part of these subsystems that they would inspect each and every time as part of their process. Now with the new compliance program that they've introduced, we've gone away from that. We're now looking at it from a risk-based perspective. We're looking at going through those sections of ISO 1345. We're looking at those different elements that were never covered in the previous audits before. And it's more of a holistic inspection where instead of going, we're going to go section 1, section 2, section 3, section 4. In this type of audit program, we're going to be looking at one section, but it's going to bring us into 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 other things as part of the inspection. Now, if you're used to ISO audits, that's how ISO auditors have been doing it for years. And in many cases, the FDA inspectors are going to be learning the ISO audit way, which is it's much more of a holistic approach. It's everything's integrated. How are things integrated? How is my risk management procedure impacted by my complaints and by my post-market surveillance and impacted by my device recall, et cetera? And they all link together. And that wasn't necessarily the case in the old system, in the QSIT system, where we'd look at one system and then we'd leave that system and really go on to the next system. And we weren't really looking at all the linkages between them.
So one thing that's highlighted as well is training. Training is highlighted as a key step. And the question I have for you is why is training across the organization, beyond just the quality team, important to QMSR compliance?
Again, another loaded question. I think one of the things to think about is that the QMSR doesn't just affect the quality teams. In the old days with the QSR, it was very specific, QA quality should do this, quality should do that. Training was very focused in very select areas of the documentation in your quality system. With the QMSR, it's much more broad than you had with the QSR. Um, and every function of the quality of your team really gets impacted in some way or another by compliance that you may not have seen with the FDA system. Uh, FDA is going to be spending more times interviewing staff across all the departments. So you might have thought in the past, hey, my finance department has nothing to do with this. Uh, Maybe your finance department doesn't have requirements to do in some areas, but finance department is going to be expected to answer questions like, what's your quality policy? Where's your quality manual? How do you handle customer complaints? If somebody happens to send you a message that says there's a complaint with the device, you may not have been looking at that in the past when it comes to the old system under the QSRs. ISO 1345 really puts the emphasis on the competence and involvement across the organization. So one of the things that I think is absolutely important for you is, if you haven't got it already, have a training matrix that talks to all the departments in your company and how all the departments are related to the sections of your quality management system. If only your QA team understands the QMSR, you're not going to be ready for that inspection that's going to come at some point in the future. You're not ready for this transition.
Wow. So looking ahead, what key challenges and opportunities do you see for medical device and IVD manufacturers now that the QMSR is in force?
Well, I mean, we have to change the way we've been thinking. Manufacturers have to change the way they've been thinking for years and years and years of following the FDA's QSRs, and interpreting the QSRs. Now there's no interpretation allowed. It is basically saying ISO 13485 is the way of the land, is the way to go. So we have to update our way of thinking, which also means we have to update our documentation and the way we're going to document records in the future, the terminology we use. So we may have been working in the space for 10, 15 years, and now all of that vernacular that we're used to, the DMR, the DHR, the DHF, it's changing. It's changing. The inspectors are going to be looking to see that you, even if you use the DMR, that you reference back to the medical device file, which is the ISO 13485 version of a DMR. So that's a big deal, is that you're kind of changing the way people have been thinking. Again, one of the challenges is that if you haven't had a solid risk management process in place where you followed ISO 14971, that you've embedded that into your quality management system, that is something you're going to have to do. And that's not something that can be done in a day. It's a pretty big change. And I've already talked about internal audits and management reviews. Be prepared for the FDA scrutiny. It's a big difference between the way things were done and the way things will be done in the future. But this transition to QMSR does give you some opportunities. You're now going to have a unified quality management system that avoids the duplication that we've had for years. So we've had this system that we had to meet ISO 13485 and the FDA QSRs. Now we have to meet ISO 13485 with the regional differences for the FDA, which is very much in alignment also with the medical device single audit program, which bases itself on ISO 13485 and then the regulatory requirements for each country. So we're now going to welcome this opportunity, this enlightening to having one quality management system that is aligned with the the quality requirements that are accepted globally. Clear terminology and documentation structure across all of your markets. So companies, when you're going to another market, they're going to look at if they look at your quality system documents or your reports, they're going to see things in your reports that align with what they're used to, which is ISO 13485. And this is really a more modern risk-based framework for your quality management system. It's going to drive how you do your operations of your company. And ultimately, it may end up improving the quality of your product. I'm not promising that, but I am saying it's an opportunity. By putting a risk-based framework in there is an opportunity for seeing some things that you may not have seen in the past, which may lead to improvements in product, or it may lead to reduction in complaints or reportable events or device recalls, etc. That's just a few challenges and opportunities.
And of course, if manufacturers need help with any of this, whether they're prepared or not prepared, MedEnvoy can help you.
Absolutely, we can help you. We've got the team that knows how to do this. As I said, we've already done a number of these for other customers, and the questions are continuing to come in right now. And we love these opportunities to work with companies. And I think if you have a question, reach out to us, because this is something we know we live every single day.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's episode. Darryl, thank you so much for joining us today again and sharing your insights on this new transition with the QMSR.
You're very welcome, Tiffany. Thank you for having me. And it's a great topic. As you can tell by the way I've answered some of the questions, I'm really excited to see this transition. As I said really early on, 30 years ago, I was told by the FDA this is never going to happen, and here it is. And it's exciting to see this transition underway, I should say. And I look forward to, being able to do audits of clients in the future and seeing how they've updated their quality system to meet the FDA's requirements.
Yeah, nice to see that everything is in line. Europe, US, so it makes stuff easier going forward for everybody.
Exactly.
Also want to thank you to our listeners for tuning in to Reg with Meg today, and please follow us on Spotify for more regulatory news and insights from our experts like Darryl here. Until next time, stay informed and stay compliant. Bye, guys.